So get up, so pretty late, so so get up, so pretty late, so get up, so pretty late, so get up, so pretty late, so Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher v'nishanu v'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot v'divrei Torah. All right, welcome.
And let there be love.
Yes, four. Yes, nice. Four. I did a Torah study one Saturday morning some years ago in Springfield, and it happened to be Parshat Bereshit, and I will oftentimes bring in different kinds of tools from different places and different sources. To that's not the Zoom.
No,
that is the Zoom.
That's Zoom.
Bernie.
Adding something. Sit down.
iPad. Oh, yep, different rings. And okay. Anyway, so I started our session with a little snippet, a recording from Haydn's Geschöpfe, the Creation, which has this absolutely magnificent beginning. For those of you unfamiliar with the piece, it starts out with the personally, I prefer it better in German because I think the English sounds a little stilted. That's just my preference. Musicologists have debated whether or not which language it was written in first, whether in German or English. But it starts out with darkness on the face of the water, and Haydn doesn't use the term tohu, but that's the Hebrew, the kind of primordial chaos, and this odd building of chords that don't go where you expect them to go, especially considering we're dealing with the height of classical period in music. And then it gets to it's all very quiet and so on, and then it gets to and there was, and then this humongous C major chord from all the instruments and the choir, and like that. It's this absolutely astonishing musical burst, and I remember playing it, and Torah study was 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, so bagels were important, and coffee and like that. Anyway, there was this woman who was not aware of what was coming and proceeded to spill her orange juice all over the table. So startled by the sudden appearance of light in that piece.
I'm sure it's on YouTube.
Right. Yeah. Well,
If anybody's interested.
since I've spoken about it, I will do just that because
Yeah, in my head, I have also struck Zarathustra, which I know is not. Yeah,
right.
that's a good one too. It is, but it's not what he's saying. I was thinking later I can go look for it, but.
And yes.
I said it right, I might have said it.
By the way, the MSO ran since Elijah for 3 days this weekend. That's pretty powerful.
A couple lines.
Okay.
Did he put a couple lines on the stage?
All right.
Are we talking about Mendelssohn's Elijah?
I mentioned it.
Briefly.
Oh, yeah,
We got-
because I saw that on Sunday at the MSO.
Did you see it?
Yes,
Yeah.
I was at the MSO Sunday for,
Oh, so was I on Sunday.
Okay, here's the.
Okay.
what is this?
All right. This is Haydn, the Creation.
Okay, yeah.
Looks to be the English version, but I'll put up with it. So, and this is after very eerie. Surprise, it's not the minor chord you thought it was going to be. It's a version of a major. Yeah. That'll get your attention.
I can see the orange piece of
Yep.
coffee flying.
Yep.
Lumos, New Mexico. What are we doing?
So,
Thank you, thank you.
all right. Thank you. I will rarely pass up an opportunity to listen to that.
Yeah.
It's very accessible, very, very feel good classical music. I mean, it's exciting. It's brilliant. Anyway, so we are dealing with creation and light and so on this week in our chapter from Honey from the Rock, and this is a challenging chapter. So for a number of reasons. So one of the ideas, and which is hinted at itself within Torah, and later biblical references. I mean, in the Genesis 1 account of creation, the sun and moon and stars aren't created until day 4. Okay, raising the question, okay, let there be light. Okay, so where was it coming from? Because it was not coming from sun, moon, and stars. So the things that we would have considered to be light sources back until not too long ago, actually. And so there was this notion that there was this kind of primordial light that just suffused everything in creation of God's divine light, and that ultimately it's hidden away and to be re-revealed to us at a later time. But this notion, even quotes it in the chapter, or Zeruah Latzadik, light is sown for the righteous. So this kind of magical light that existed before sun, moon, and stars existed, and that's what illuminated the first 3 days of creation. I like, in contrast to what he was doing in terms of some chapters ago. So, the kind of duality that we were having some issues with a few weeks ago. Where is that little charge? And of course, I can play it right now. It's part of the problem with this book is there's no index. Oh, yes.
This one,
Yes, thank you. That's
page
the one.
43.
Page 43, thank you. Very close. All right. And this issue of dualities and opposites and like that. And he addresses it some here, but in a different way on page 97. And especially in this day and age where I've become aware that, you know, being careful of using language of light and darkness, and how that's been misused in some ways in the past. And he takes it on a different tack here, and he says light is a metaphor for human awareness, and that it's not just this, well, it's either dark or it's light. It goes beyond that. On page 97, light is a metaphor for human awareness, shining just between matter and energy, being between space and time, something which is not a thing. Like fishes in water, we do not know that the light is there. For if every last bit of it were gone, there would be more than darkness, there would be spiritual oblivion. If it weren't for you, God, we would be blind. And then this quote from Psalm 36, or in your light do we see light. So I appreciate that take on it. Now, Daniel Matt, who's written a number of books on Jewish mysticism, which I can say I do not claim to understand, but he has written, you know, one of his most famous books that he wrote is called God and the Big Bang, and he talks about ideas of the origins of the universe and some rather startling similarities between the Kabbalistic notion of creation and what we think we know about the creation of the universe through modern day science. And as someone said to me ages ago, which I must have been Elijah, they said, you know, the more you get into the extremely small or the extremely large, it sounds a lot less like science and a lot more like religion, because just so I'm loving that I totally forgotten this section that begins the chapter on page 94, section 61, and the idea that Moses and Elijah, the similarities that they share, and it also called to mind one of the stranger stories in the Talmud about a rabbi about 2,000 years ago, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who's credited with writing the Zohar, credited with writing that Kabbalistic book. It pretty much universally accepted it was written in medieval Spain around 11th, 12th century. But there is this legend that he wrote the Zohar, and there's this really, really bizarre story that's told about him, that during the Roman occupation, he had to flee, much like Moses had to flee and Elijah had to flee. You can see where I'm bringing up this story. He had to flee, and so he and his disciple, they found this cave up in the hills, And they went in there, and because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was such a pious man and such a devout rabbi, God provided a spring of water for them and a carob tree, which magically grew and provided them sustenance. And they were in this cave for years. They would study Torah during the day, and then at night they would sleep in the sand. They would take their clothes off but cover themselves with sand to prevent their clothes from wearing out more by sleeping in them. So they did that, and then finally, after like a few years, they come out, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai looks out, and he looks down the valley, and there's this farmer plowing his field and so on like that. And he's so intensely filled with divine energy and from this mystical experience that very Superman style, created by two Jews, by the way. He literally heat fishes the farmer, and I mean, he looks, and the farmer is incinerated, and God says, "This is what I had. Is this what I had you, study Torah all these years in the cave for? Get back in the cave. You need to chill out a bit more. You're not safe to be in this world. You're not safe to be in this world right now." So they go back into the cave and kind of decompress a bit, and then finally, ultimately, are able to reemerge and not destroy things. But similar take to this Moses and Elijah story that I want to share with you.
Cantor, what's
Yeah.
the Rabati?
Sector Rabati would be, I don't know specifically.
It's on the first page too, right?
Where
Yeah.
On the bottom of the first page of the second.
Yeah. Right. And does it have it in its
Page 6.
Marshall, do you know the specific rabbinic reference? I don't. It is a, it's a rabbinic text. It's a commentary.
Okay.
So. And yes, go ahead and Google it. We can use our technology for that.
Yeah, well, most of the chapters start out with like, oh, Genesis or Deuteronomy or whatever, so this, I did notice that, I just didn't think to ask.
Yeah,
What is that?
yeah, so.
It's a collection of Agadic,
Stories.
Midrash on the Pentateuch and prophetic readings, special Sabbaths and so on, composed around 845 CE, probably called Rabati to distinguish it from the early Pesita de Rab Kahana. Okay, and this is from Wikipedia. Oh, such a great Jewish source. As well, in 5 entire Piskot sections, and let's see. Well, there's an edited version from 1880, 51 homilies, some have poems, and obviously.
Yeah, so it's
Wikipedia. Okay,
a rabbinic commentary.
yeah,
And I
I did guess that from Rabati.
yeah, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's something I had never heard of.
So the page 95 mentions Kushner mentions Adam Kadmon, the primordial man, and that's also what we get when we have our Sphero diagram laid out this way in anthropomorphized form. And this notion that when this original being was created, stretched from one end of the universe to the other, and the image of and Gershom Scholom's translation of sections of Kabbalah talking about light just pouring out of this creature's eyes and ears and mouth, and then connects it though to Moses came down off the mountain and was shining and had to have a veil over his face. When I was a kid, I still love that. But I remember as a kid, one thing that I thought was really cool was how Charlton Heston aged every time he spoke to God. And he came down, he was looking a little grayer and a little older. And I remember as a kid, I thought, that's this. So,
And I'm sorry, and then this shattering here is why we have Tikkun Olam.
right. And so we get another reference to the story of the shattering of the containers that were meant to hold this primordial light, which is, echoed also by Moses shattering the tablets, the first set of tablets, when Moses comes down and sees the golden calf that they've built. And this idea that all this light is, as I've said for years, it's covered in schmutz. Okay? And the schmutz is what we as humans interpret the world as evil or wrongdoing, or creation not being the way that God originally intended for creation to be. And it's our job to do acts of tikkun olam, repairing the world, restoring the world, by gathering up these sparks and dusting them off and gathering the light together and bringing that to try to build the light and make this world, nudge this world closer to God's original design. Oh, I'm still looking with these faces, which true disclosure, I do. Hey, you said volume. You said volume. But that's okay. And look, I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it this morning. I started getting into this crazy stuff about, it's been over 25 years since I started, exploring this stuff in one way or another, and so on. And there's still plenty in this book that I think. So if you're feeling that, if you're feeling this sense of, I don't understand this at all, that's okay. That's all right. This is, well, the little blurb from some review, quite simply the easiest introduction to Jewish mysticism you can read. Okay, so now easiest, that doesn't mean it's all going to be easy. That's right. It doesn't mean it's going to be immediately accessible. So, Marcia.
There's a reflection of this in the world of art. One of my students is in Japan, where she studied, and she says she's seen in museums and in art galleries where the artist has broken the pot and then put it together with bits of gold in between the shards. And you can have the gold stands for the light, and it's like a visual. This is how art sometimes to absorb, but when you see it in a visual representation, not that it makes it clearer, but and in music too. There's Leonard Cohen here,
Right.
in his song Anthem, he says that's
There's a crack in everything.
there's a crack in everything, and that's how the light comes in.
Exactly. Love that song.
I think Aaron Rodgers read that.
Sorry to say that, but but it's quite thing to be done over.
I don't get the reference, but that's all right.
The kid, he went into the dark for days. 4 days.
And
4 days. Yeah, that's why.
I should be dismissive about it because everybody's spiritual journey is important, but that's fine.
It's important.
He seems to spend more time radio talk shows.
Yeah, and it's a careful line to tread. In it, because there are unfortunately folks out there who will happily separate you from your money, claiming to make this
I think that's what.
more understandable, make this more accessible. Years ago, when I would mention something about Kabbalah, there was a time when people said, "Oh, you mean like Madonna?" It's like,
Austin, yeah, Aston Kutcher.
yeah, and and so they're just. I would just suggest if this stuff is interesting to you and you do want to pursue it further, just be aware. There are snake oil salesmen out there who will use this stuff. And I've always found anyway that one measure of the level of snake oil you're being sold is how much does it cost? What's the ask for, it's one thing for a lecture at the JCC that, maybe is $10 or something. But if they're asking you to sign on some longer term financial commitment, that's beware, be careful, just be careful.
And just a little red, what do you call those?
Yes, the little red strings.
Yeah.
Yes, right, yeah. Wait.
I want to say bundle, that's a bundle. Anyway.
So this stuff is very challenging, and as I said, as I've been rereading this book, there are a lot of things that, oh yeah, that's cool. Oh yeah, that's a nice way of explaining that. What is he talking about? So don't feel like you're somehow deficient if this stuff isn't crystal clear.
But we asked for this and now we know
That's right.
why.
Right.
Yeah.
Why people have said, maybe we don't talk about this instead.
No, we talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And all I can say is we are not going to ask for henna.
yeah.
I read the book I picked up.
Ah, yes.
No. The book of Enoch we talked about, I picked up a paperback copy, I'm sorry, at Half Price Books that I found tucked away there. Should have been tucked farther away. That's all I'll say for now.
I'm not sure what book you mean.
It's a sort of lost book of the Torah that's not canon.
It's from the Apocrypha. You find it in a Catholic Bible in between what they would call Old Testament and the Christian scriptures,
Yeah.
along with things like First and Second Maccabees, which
Yeah.
is part of that section. So yeah,
Yeah.
and sent me a photograph of it from Half Price Books, and I responded and said, I'm gonna need permission from your Rebbe before I sell you.
Didn't read the.
That was my answer. You're gonna.
We'll talk later, but
Yeah.
wait, it's all.
Yeah.
It's all I can say.
So yeah, there's a lot of weirdness out there, no question. And so I wanted to take a little bit of time, and if there were specific things, and some of you came in saying you had specific things you wanted to address or that struck you about this. And then I wanted to take a somewhat different tack and share with you two essays from Kushner's Invisible Lines of Connection, which is, taking some of these ideas that he has here, but then reflecting them in our contemporary world and finding, which I love. I mean, I love people that do this. Lawrence Kushner does it brilliantly. Larry Hoffman as well. Jeff Sulkin is always finding words of Torah wisdom in contemporary sources. And Joel Gershauer, Jewish educator out of LA, fantastic at it. I try to do it as much as folks will put up with me on it. Torah, Star Trek, that sort of thing. Seinfeld, it's a page of Talmud. But I guess I can say in terms of if you're feeling frustrated with some of this material, that, give you reshoot, to give you permission to, yes, you can be frustrated. Some of this stuff is very frustrating and very challenging to understand, even when Kushner's trying to spell it out very clearly. But it's the kind of thing that if you're aware of it, you start to see different iterations in different places. And that's part of, well, we'll get to the essay where he talks about invisible lines of connection. We'll get to that in a moment. But I guess the best way to say this is this material by its very nature, and a lot of Jewish study is as well, a lot of Jewish study, but it's not by nature linear. It's not, okay, we're going to start with this idea, we're going to develop this idea, and from this idea, we're going to get to this, and then we're going to get to this, and then we're going to get to this. It's more of a kind of, take a paintbrush and splatter it against the wall, and it's more of a Jackson Pollock kind of style of writing. Sherry, among her many accomplishments, was an attorney, and so she loved the legalistic aspects of Jewish study and Talmud and like that. But a law text is set out in a certain way, and it's very linear. This is not a law text. This is speculation on things that ultimately are beyond our knowing. But it's attempts at trying to find some deeper understanding into the nature of the universe that sometimes gets to very strange places. So I've been yakking a lot. Comments, questions?
I have another question.
Okay.
On what you just said. So at the time when Kabbalah originated, when it was first written, so the only thing I can think is that it's another attempt to understand God.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the notion, so the Zohar was written in Spain, 11th, 12th century, roundabout. There was another flowering of Kabbalah mysticism in the late 1500s, and that's when a group got together in the north of Israel, around the city of Sfat. For those of you that have been to Sfat, yeah, it's up there. It's up there. But lots of mystics there, and things that again, Reform Jews, certainly growing up in a Reform context, I never had any idea that Lakadodi, which of course we sang for the Totsky's melody, okay, that's Lurianic Kabbalah. That's Jewish mysticism from Sfat, which there it was in the little black Union prayer book for us, selectively, right, of course, and selectively edited, of course, as I've mentioned before, there are 9 verses to the Lakadodi poem, and Reform Judaism edited it down to verses 1, 2, 5, and 9. You go to a conservative or Orthodox congregation, they will do all 9 verses of Lakadodi on Friday night, hopefully switching melodies in the middle, so you don't have 9 verses of the same melody. I always switch verses after melodies after verse 5. But yeah, but why verses 1, 2, 5, and 9? And the answer that I learned many years ago was those are the verses that don't have messianic aspirations. Those are the 1, 2, 5, and 9 don't mention rebuilding Jerusalem and restoring the temple service and all that. So that's why those 4 out of the 9 were chosen by the early Reform rabbis as being okay.
Never knew that. I just thought someone decided to shorten this up.
Yep. Well, and that's certainly one of the things they were doing,
You know,
but that was one of the rationales.
That's one of the things, you know, it's funny you mention that, because when I was talking to that church group or Bible study group, a week ago now, and I was trying to mention, so compactly, that there are different streams of Judaism, like there are different ways to be, you know, blah, blah. And that, Reform Judaism is not just Judaism light, it's carefully selected to be meaningful, and that people can choose after they've been, you know, educated in the whole, not the whole thing, but, you know, whatever. And that, there are reasons why we do certain rituals and reasons why we don't. And it's not for frivolous reasons, and that we change, which is why there's no ED on the end of reform. And it's not just like that, you know, it can be glacially slow, or it can be pretty slow, but it's not all of a sudden and frivolous. So, because I know there are some people in certain quarters of the Jewish world who think we're just very,
you know, we're not Jews.
well, that's true too, in some extreme cases, but yeah, so. But still, they just sat there kind of metaphorically anyway with their jaws on the floor.
Well, I'm glad that came up. I guess it's a question I always think, okay, I wonder why, but I never asked why.
That's why I like the offshoot conversations
Oh.
here, because you never know when you're gonna pick up.
Yeah, well, that came from, I learned that from Dina Feingold, so I don't take credit for that myself, but yeah, I learned that from her, and it's, yeah. It's, I grew up conservative, and it seemed to me like, wow.
Interesting that you mentioned Dina. I learned Torah trope from Dina,
Mhm.
and you learned Torah trope from me.
I did.
It's like from generation to generation.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I'll write that down. That
Yeah.
might catch on.
It might. It just might.
Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
I have a question, because you know, it's so much about light. And every time as I was reading this, they don't really just always talk about light. It was always like a little beam of light, a little visible light, and light poking through the face. So is that just metaphorically light, but in a different? I mean, when I think of light, I think of, ooh, big light, but there are at least 3 or 4 references here to little beam, needle.
Yeah,
Needle head or something.
Right.
It's like,
yeah.
and holes in his face. What do they mean by that? The light shines through us.
I would assume.
Okay. That was where I went,
Yeah.
okay.
But I think
that going on.
And you know, I think the needle reference, again, this notion that when God began creating the universe, the Kabbalistic idea, you know, God had to do an act that seemed soon of contraction, withdrawal from God. God had to create a void to get to make anything, because everything was God. There was no room. God had to clear off the divine workbench. And so, and the story, and it's mentioned briefly in here, the idea that in fact this universe is not the first time God has tried to do that, and that previous times have ended in disaster. The whole enterprise just kind of collapsed. But you know, the question, I guess, in God's mind is, you know, can a universe exist if I let even the tiniest little bit of my divine light into this void to try to create a universe, or is it going to, the whole thing going to come crashing down? So I think that's part of it, and I shared with you the idea. I've shared with you the idea that I did find this. I don't know if it was his interpretation or not, but Rabbi Larry Hoffman thought years ago that if you imagine a dark room and a flashlight shining at the roof corner, at the other corner, and that beam of lights, you know, you take different segments of it and then you arrange them on a plane and in this shape, and that's what the spheroids are. And the part closest to the original life source is the very top, the head, Keter, crown, and then the part on the far wall, which will be the dimmest comparatively, will be the grounding malchut, the part of God's energy that we can most closely connect to, because it's considered the top three spherot, the top three sections. Keter, Bina, and Chokhmah are like really beyond human understanding. It's the lower seven that we can attempt to interact with. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, well, no, a little bit. It relates to our little offshoots. I would love to look at the Apocrypha and to take things out of it that Jews use, but it's not in their, like the Maccabees, and that might be an interesting thing to look at.
Well, we have
With our holiday, but it's not in any of our writings. It's in the Catholic.
Megillah has,
Yeah.
Megillah has
Yeah.
done some of that.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, that could be something we could do
Sometimes.
around, and ideally, leading up to Hanukkah would be the logical time for that, but that's.
And leading up to Purim, I mean, with Megillah.
So, any other questions, comments, thoughts on light and
Well, I think,
sitting? I can do it.
thanks. Hi. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you.
All right,
Yes.
great, thanks. Okay. So I was gonna say, in general, I was just gonna say that for me, as someone who is not linear and kind of intuitive and thinks in a different way, maybe than a lot of other people, for me, I personally don't find this frustrating or, extremely challenging. It's very intriguing. And one thing that I thought of is that if that could be helpful for some people is to, if possible, to suspend Western ways of thinking, kind of jettison that and think more about if people are able to think without words and think, which is, I tend to think in pictures anyway. So if people are able to just forget about Western ways of processing and learning and frameworks, I don't know, that might be one way of making things more accessible for some people.
Yeah, you're right. If you try to bring a Western sense of organization to this material, you'll just find yourself getting very frustrated. So you need to be able to suspend his belief a bit and just to acknowledge that, again, science is wonderful. Science has done amazing things for us. Some that have incredibly improved our life, some that threaten to destroy our life. But it's a tool like anything else. It's a lens. It's a way of looking at the world. And oftentimes very, very useful, but it does not explain everything, which is why we still have art and poetry and music and all of these things that express aspects of the human condition that really can't be understood by Western notions.
Yes. And
Very helpful in learning about this too. Imagination, visualization,
mhm.
that kind of thing, because this is so different from difficult kind of study that we do. I agree.
I had an experience the other day. I was tutoring a fourth grader, so he's 9 years old, and we were studying the Yotzer prayer, which is light and God's creation of. And all of a sudden, he started talking about something that he learned in science. He related. Here we're doing Hebrew, whatever, and he starts talking, and I'm thinking, you learn so much even from a child that is of consequence, and that was my God moment of the day. It was just, and we were mentioning science before. They're so closely related, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is a child I just learned this from, and it was, I bet you experience that with the kids that you work with.
I do. I try to keep up with whatever it is they're learning in school at the time the school's in session, because I've taught K-12, so all those contents, so not all of it, but I'm aware of all of it. And so that's so much of their lives.
And also there are multiple ways to do science. Science is not just, there's a Western mythology and all that, but there are other ways of knowing and understanding what some might call science. So there are other ways of learning and understanding and so on, besides what white people like to consider.
A number of teachers of mine have borrowed from the Buddhists, but have used the phrase, often the notion of beginner's mind. And that when dealing with this kind of material, we need to, unlearn things that we have learned. And sometimes kids, sometimes younger kids, they haven't quite, their brains haven't been compartmentalized quite as much, and are able to get these kinds of notions. There was one of my favorite short science fiction stories, forgetting who wrote it. It was called Mimsy Were the Borogroves. And Mimsy Were the Borogroves, which is from Jabberwocky, so Lewis Carroll, and it postulated that Lewis Carroll's craziness was aided by the discovery of a tesseract, of a 4-dimensional cube that he wasn't able to really make much sense of, but I forget if it was his children or his niece and nephew or something like that. But they were able to manipulate it in ways that he wasn't quite able to fully understand. And the younger of the two was better at it. Became more adept at it. And what?
Lewis Paget.
It was printed in an anthology many years ago of the greatest short science fiction stories of the 20th century. But one of the things I really loved about that story was, besides the fantastical nature of it, okay, this explains Lewis Carroll, this explains the looking glass, this, that and the hookah smoking caterpillar. But the notion that the kids were able to get this idea of, more than just the 3 dimensions in space, that they were able to grab onto that because their brains hadn't been said, no, you've got height, width, depth, and so yeah, Patty.
Yeah, I have been struck by a couple of things that folks have said, and about looking at science from a Western perspective versus, if we get out of the Western kind of civilization, a little box that we have all been trained to live in. that there are more ways to view the world and the human experience than what our Western civilization teaches us, which I think is a problem in the schools because they only want one, in some places only want a certain way of looking at the world. But what also struck me is what Marcia said about children, how she heard from a child a different way of seeing things. And I'm thinking one of the things that intrigues me about this book and about Judaism is the idea that the concept of God is ineffable. That it's a mysterious, it's wonderful, and that sliver of light is really all we can see. All our, like, you know, like humans can only see a certain small spectrum of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. You know what I'm saying?
Now,
We see this much of what animals and insects can see, so much more. And so understanding that how limited we are in our ability to understand God, and it to me is just fabulous. And that's not something I got from a more linear kind of Christian upbringing that said this is the way it is. And it was actually fairly narrow. Now, I do understand that there are Christian mystics that may also have a further understanding that is more similar to the Jewish mystic and Eastern mystics, but I have not explored that. But back to the child, when I grew up and was understanding science and religion and history and everything, the concept of the atom, remember the concept of the atom, that it had this little proton in the middle and that there were electrons that circled around it, orbited it like planets do. That's not even close, not even close. And our children, our grandchildren, are going to be learning about quantum physics and how things can be in more places than one, that you know, quantum entanglement, all this kind of stuff that to us is brand new, but to them will be science. That will be science. So how will that affect their approach to spirituality, understanding that science is just as mystical as this book says it is? I don't know if that made sense, but
It did.
yeah, absolutely. And yes, some science and also, you know, a big piece of it, you know, depending on frame of reference.
Right.
Bernie was chiding me the other day that, you know, no, we do not live in a Newtonian universe. And it's like, okay, but you know, much of what Sir Isaac came up with 300 years ago, it's like,
Still good stuff.
it's still good stuff.
Yeah.
If I take this and I let go, it will drop.
It doesn't mean I have to stop using the analogy about Messianic Judaism that that it's impossible for two objects to occupy the same point in space at the same time.
Yeah, we're not
Do I
gonna
have
go
to stop using
Yeah.
that?
You know what Schrodinger who came up with the wave equation said about it? He said, I don't like it, and I wish I never had anything to do with it because of the implications of
Who said that?
Schrodinger.
Right.
And what's the book? In Searching Schrodinger's.
Yes.
A very interesting, wild way out there.
So,
That you brought my name up about chiding you, I wasn't chiding you. Okay. There's something else
What?
I've been, anybody been writing about.
We can't.
Mine is called Frames of Reference.
I don't think they can hear you because you're too far from the speaker, maybe.
Oh,
Saying,
okay.
the speaker towards Bernie.
Which is called Frames of Reference.
Is that better?
Okay, and the point of the point
Thanks.
I'm thinking is the following. Okay. If you're only in this room, our frames of reference are this four, we know our positions to each other. I've heard scientists on the radio say, I heard one say, you should never talk about the sun coming up because we know the earth is rotating and that's what's really happening. And my point is the following, if your frame of reference is sitting on the earth, It's okay to say the sun looks like it's coming out.
Right.
If your frame of reference is the solar system, then you can talk about whether the planets are rotating and their effect and why some planets go in reverse order, Jupiter at time of the year, but you can't understand if your frame of reference is here.
Right.
And some people who understand gravitation, okay, which I don't, okay, have a frame of reference that is way beyond anything that we can conceive of in terms of gravity. I don't understand how gravity comes out of the same equations that acceleration does. But they do when you understand that logic, okay? And so, but there are other frames of reference, which is your political attitude towards the world. Whether you think financial is the right way to look at the universe, or whether people's behavior or people's feelings are the right way to look at the universe. And what I'm saying is, there are many, many aspects to things. And the way you choose to perceive that selection and understand it is what you're thinking of at the moment. But it's not only the right way. Okay. Frame of reference, Earth is rotating, okay? But if you, back in the fourth centuries ago, firing not rockets, but balls, okay, of a cannon, they seem to swerve. Okay, your frame of reference is you're sitting on an Earth and the thing seems to swerve. And we have a comment for that. We call it Coriolis force, which physicists don't say exists, because what's really happening is the Earth is moving underneath the damn cannonball.
Right.
Yeah. So it depends on your frame of reference, and there's nothing wrong in my mind of using your local frame of reference to help you understand the things that are going on that you're concerned about at the moment. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
If you're concerned about the universe, your frame of reference is not sitting in this room, not knowing that there's a solar system.
And I suspect many of you have probably seen it, but there's a wonderful little video and it's available on YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube, called Powers of 10. Which
Called what?
Powers of 10. And it starts just at, our level of perception. It's actually Chicago, right by the lake. I'm forgetting, I don't know Chicago well enough, I'm forgetting exactly where, but it starts with this family, they're having a picnic and it's a nice summer day and so on like that. And let's see, it then starts to back up, starts to, zoom out. And every 10 seconds, it changes by a power of 10 as it zooms out until finally, you see the solar system, and then you're seeing, other star clusters and so on, and then zooms back in, and then proceeds to do the same thing going down to the subatomic level.
A little bit like the end of Men in Black.
Haven't seen that movie in ages,
Yeah.
so I'll take your word. Yeah,
Inside
but-
of Marvel on a cat's,
Well, that wasn't what I meant. At the end, never mind.
Um,
well, that,
So I want to share with you these couple of essays from Kushner's Invisible Lines, and we'll transition with two things. First off, quantum physics humor. Heisenberg and Schrodinger are driving down the highway and they get pulled over by a policeman, and the cop says, "You know how fast you were going?" And Heisenberg says, "No, but I can tell you exactly what direction we're going in." And then say, "All right, yeah, I got to look in the trunk." Yeah, and then the cop comes back around and says, "You know, you got a dead cat in your trunk." And Schrodinger says, "Well, I do now." I know now. Quantum physics humor.
Yeah.
So, you never heard that? Mark brought this to my attention, and I just wanted to get your sense on whether we should try this, whether we should do this. As I mentioned, we're coming up on the period of the Omer, counting the Omer, which starts on, well, we'll do the first night counting at the Seder, at our community Seder. And it follows this well, it among other things, and the mystical interpretation is kind of exploration of the different spherot and their energies, how they interact with one another, and so on. So there's this group of rabbis from small congregations, and they are doing an exploration of the Omer, which happens to, they're going to be doing it noon Eastern time on Wednesdays, which would put it at 11 o'clock our time. Description is, join us as we mark the journey our people made from slavery to Egypt to becoming free people who stood together about Mount Sinai by counting the 50 days of the Omer. During the Omer, we draw inspiration from our people's transformation, reflecting on our own journeys of freedom and growth. Our reflection is traditionally fostered by the study of sacred text. This year, our team of rabbis in small congregations brings you 7 sessions on Nevi'im and Ketuvim, the prophets and writing sections of the Tanakh. I didn't get them all down, but for example, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, Ruth, Ezra, Nehemiah, Daniel, join us for one or more of the sessions as we delve into our textual tradition during this period of reflection, Wednesdays at noon Eastern, beginning on, well, yeah, I guess that would be it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that'd be it.
Okay.
So this would leave us less time to discuss Kushner's book. And if these sessions are an hour, we'd have half an hour, assuming we started on time.
Yeah.
We'd have half an hour to talk about the Kushner book, and then we could watch it. What do y'all think?
Yeah. I'd like to do
I
that.
think we should try.
Yeah,
We
let's
find
see.
that it's not useful.
Yeah, all right. So we will starting our next set, we will not meet next Wednesday. I
Right.
think all of us are going to be kind of busy. I'll be in Massachusetts anyway, but
Yeah.
and even if I were in town, we would not be having class next Wednesday for obvious reasons. So that'll be in 2 weeks. So, all right, so we'll give that a shot. I'll send out an email about it, and if you're not, I mean, we can watch here, we can log on and watch it here. But if you're watching remotely, Sydney or Patty or anybody else who can't be here in person, give you the link and you can register and hop on the Zoom from where you are. Because if we're doing their Zoom, people aren't going to be able to join us remotely. Right?
Right.
Yeah. All right. So, all right, we'll give it a shot, and if we like it, then we'll stick with it, and if not, then we move on there. All right, let's switch gears, and I want to share with you 2 essays from this book, both of which touch on some of what Kushner was saying this week and last week. And again, the subtitle of the book, Invisible Lines of Connection, Sacred Stories of the Ordinary. So here are from 1996, so a while ago now. Still mind-boggling to me. But two brief little essays of expressions of mysticism in modern life through the most mundane of things, video games. So what I'd like us to do is, I want to do our Shalom chant to just get us into a relaxed, different kind of frame of mind here. And then after we've done that, we'll have a we'll have a period of some silence. And then we'll chant the shalom. I'll read the first essay. We'll chant the shalom chant another time. We'll have another brief period of silence. I'll read the second essay. We'll shalom one more time and then return to this plane of reality. So I would invite you to sit up and in as comfortable positions in these chairs. And let's take a deep breath in, Nishimamuka. Slowly let it out. Let's do that 3 more times. Deep breath in through your nose. Slowly let it out through your mouth. Time, deep breath in. Time with the chant, then we'll have a brief period of silence, and I'll read the first essay. Shalom. 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 the hidden signature. I remember the first computer game we ever got. Since hardly anyone owned computers in those days, you had to use your television set for a monitor. By plugging a cable into the antenna jack, you turned the TV into a primitive video arcade. Then you could play Pong in monochrome. You operated a little paddle that moved up and down one side of the screen. The ball, actually a white square, moved horizontally. With enough coordination, you could get your paddle to intersect with its trajectory, and whereupon you heard the game's sole sound effect. Pip. And so it went. Pip, pip, pip. After you got good at it, you could crank up the speed. Pip, 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 pip. People in our home, who shall remain nameless, played it for hours. A few years later, Atari became the rage. As I recall, Atari originally had 4 different games. My favorite was called Adventure. It was your basic Dungeons and Dragons genre, with different castles and rooms, a key, hidden doorways, a bat that could steal the key, even whole areas where the obstacles were invisible. Our whole family really got into it. The kids, of course, quickly surpassed their parents. They would come home from school with new tips and tricks. Some of them were even undocumented, which is computer talk for saying such maneuvers were not written down in any manual. One of the most amazing came home from junior high with my daughter. In a particular place inside the Black Castle, the diligent searcher could find a small white dot that was too small to be noticeable as a normal game object. Indeed, if you did find it, you would think it was a glitch in your video monitor. But by taking this dot back to the starting screen, you could enter a hidden, otherwise inaccessible room. Entering the room had absolutely nothing to do with playing the game. All you would find in the room was a rainbow and the name of the person who invented the game. For all I know, every computer programmer does something like this. Somewhere, behind some hidden wall, available only to the initiated, there's another room. And in that room is the name of the artist. What I want to know is, if the signature of the creator is not just in some hidden room, but in every created thing, why can't we see it? I once heard of a man whose dental work made it possible for him to actually hear radio broadcasts. Somehow the combination of fillings in his teeth accidentally turned his mouth into a primitive receiver. But he found the sound so distracting that he had the fillings replaced. The radio signals were still there. He had just chosen not to hear them anymore. virtual reality. One of my sons brought home a new computer game. This was not one of those video arcade contraptions with primitive little animated characters chasing one another around the screen, or spaceships shooting at alien invaders. It didn't even require split-second visual reflexes. It's a new breed, he told me, called virtual reality. You play it by entering it. Your only chance at winning is by imagining that you are actually inside it. Instead of asking, how do I win this game? You ask, what would I do if I really lived in this world? At the beginning of this game, called Mist, you look at the screen and you find yourself on an island. There's a dock, a forest, buildings, stairways. The graphics and sound effects are impressive and convincing. There are no instructions, no rules. You go places by aiming a little pointing finger and clicking. You can look up and down, turn around, climb stairs, wander all around the place. Everywhere your curiosity leads you, there are things to discover, learn, and remember. There are machines you can operate, a library full of books you can open and read. After a while, the dedicated player will discover how to leave the island and go to other mysterious places. Devotees say the game is properly played over weeks, even months. And the purpose of it all? Why, of course, to figure out what you're doing there. But to do that, you first have to figure out how the place works. What fascinates me here is not yet another sophisticated and clever way to waste time in front of a computer screen. It's the concept of a game whose purpose is for the player to discover the purpose. Virtual reality, schmirtual reality, this is no game. What's going on here? Why am I here? Are there any rules? What are they? How does my behavior affect what's going on? Upon hearing about all this, Alan Feldman, a friend who was a professor of English, suggested that it's a lot like childhood. I'd go further. It may be a lot like adulthood, too. We all find ourselves in this world, and the object seems to be to figure out what we're doing here. Unfortunately, most of the ways one thing is connected to or dependent upon another thing are not immediately apparent. If we live long enough, take careful notes, and listen to those who have gone before us, we might stand a chance. After all, meaning is primarily a matter of relationship. If something is connected to absolutely nothing, symbolically, linguistically, physically, psychologically, it is literally meaningless. In the same way, if something is connected to everyone and everything, it would be supremely meaningful. I suppose that would be God, the one through whom everything is connected to everything else, the source of all meaning. Religious traditions are the collected rules of the game. They tell us how the world works. And if you play by them, you are rewarded, hopefully before it's time to leave, with an understanding of why you are here, what is otherwise known as the meaning of life. While my new virtual reality computer game may be infuriatingly intricate and frustrating, at least I have the comfort of knowing that it was designed by someone. I may not be clever enough to figure out its purpose, but it does have one. Its rules can be learned, it can be completed, it has an end. Life, on the other hand, comes with no such implicit guarantee, and its time frame and playing field are literally beyond our comprehension. So what if there were a virtual reality computer game that was programmed to approximate real life? If you could design such a program, what would be the object? The way I see it is there are only a few rules. The first rule of the game of life is that you can't decide when to begin playing. One day, out of the blue, you realize that you're playing. Someone or something else determined when the game would begin. And it wasn't your parents. They may have known about the birds and the bees and even set out to conceive a child, but they didn't have a clue that it was going to be you. And now that they've had a chance to meet you, while they most likely love you, they probably have picked someone else. In religious language, this means you are a creature. Someone else made you, and you are neither its partner nor its puppet. You are its manifestation, its agent, its child. The second rule is that you cannot decide when to stop playing the game either. One day, out of the blue, you're dead. For a slogan on the box of this game of life, we could use something I once saw on a t-shirt. Life. You're not going to make it out alive. That means there's no way you can win the game by staying in it forever. No matter how many points, toys, honors, conquests, dollars you accumulate, sooner than anyone expects or wants, the game is abruptly over. You hear a little chime, maybe a buzzer. The keyboard freezes, the screen goes blank. The game ends without warning. Nothing you acquire, accomplish, or believe will have any effect whatsoever on when the game ends. But there's good news. Dying does not mean that you lose. It's what you do before you die that determines whether or not you win when you die. The third rule, just to keep you on your toes, is that each player is issued apparently random, undeserved gifts and handicaps throughout the progress of the game. Figuring out why you got the combination package you did transforms all disabilities into gifts, just as refusing to figure out why you were issued what you received transforms all gifts into disabilities. My father used to say that all men are not created equal. Some get dealt a full house, others a pair of twos. The question, therefore, is not whether you deserve the hand you were dealt, but how you choose to play it. The fourth rule is that points are awarded whenever you can discern the presence or the signature of the creator, and then to act so as to help others see it too. And the signature is not in objects, but in actions and thoughts and feelings, and not just in sunshine and happiness, but in agony, struggle, and death. Remember, finding the signature and then acting in such a way as to help others find it too is the only way you accumulate game points. And the last rule is that everything is connected to everything else. Therefore, life is supercharged, permeated, and overbrimming with purpose and meaning. Most of the time, we are oblivious to it. We go about our lives as if every event were an accident. And then something happens, and we see the connection. For just a moment, it's unmistakable. We are astonished that we couldn't see it until now. All of creation is one great unity. There are no coincidences. Throughout all creation, just beneath the surface, joining each person to every other person and to every other thing in a luminous organism of sacred responsibility, we discover invisible lines of connection. Now that's my idea of a game. Shalom. 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 Get ready. I invite you to slowly let your eyes open. Return to this plane of existence. There's Lawrence Kushner's mystical take on old video game tech. Again, sacred stories of the ordinary. You wouldn't think to look for mystical meaning in most computer games.
That second one.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I've shared this with lots of students. All right.
I have this question.
Yeah.
Most religions believe the second game is the correct game.
That's a good question.
Say again, the second,
Do most religions believe that that game is the correct game?
no, the second.
Because they don't.
You answered the question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I think your salon chant and quiet was very conducive to finding it. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to remember to include some more of that. It's very easy to get bogged down in talking about the words, and some of this material really is, needs to be just experienced.
And when I finally got a computer in my rig, I decided I was gonna bring some classical CDs in. And it was really very interesting, because at first the kids said, we don't want to listen to this. And I said, I guess it's so long ago that, well, that's what we're gonna do for now. And it didn't take too long until when they came into my classroom, and this was not just the kids that were familiar with classes. It was all the classes. They'd say, well, what are we listening to today? And it really made the kids much calmer and learn better.
Yeah, I used to play music in my reading intervention classes, and it cost about something like 10 kids, and of course they wanted to bring their own music and play their own music. I said, no, it's my computer, I choose. And I played, sometimes I played like Celtic, very slow, music that I don't know that I had, and other stuff that was very calm and slow, and just slow them down because they all came in like, gym class or some other class and lunch and whatever. Yeah.
I have a
Right.
question.
Florida work too, other teachers didn't. So,
Yes, Sydney.
Yes, so in terms of, well, a couple things. One is, in terms of the idea about connection, I feel like for me, why would stuff not be connected? For me, I think of it as if it's like to think that something that's not connected, stuff is not connected, like they're not this stuff that we don't know about that's there. It feels like that's very, I don't know, it feels very human centric to think in that way, to think that stuff is not connected. It, like, yeah, I mean, certainly all stuff is connected. I mean, I just feel like that. The other thing is, I have a question actually in terms of the other program you were talking about that we would be maybe doing, or that the class would be doing, that Mark had brought up. So if the Zoom people, and I don't know if, I'm not sure if I like missed hearing you ask what the Zoom people thought of that. I don't know. I didn't hear that. But so if we were going to do that, which I'm interested in doing that, I'm just wondering, is there going to be a conversation about those topics then, that series of topics? And then how would the Zoom folks get back into that if we were offline watching that Zoom and then we came back in, or how would that be working?
We'll have to figure that out. I don't have an answer for that right now. But we'll
Thanks,
probably
question.
require, yeah, so. But good question. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Have a good day, and this heads up, it's coming soon.
And speaking of, all right, Jack wants to know if you would make your potatoes. Yes, of course. Fabulous. And then you get in one. Just one. All right. There's something. Yeah, yeah. And, 2 months.
Gordon.
You have time.
Yes.